After paying for an $8,000 trip for my son and daughter-in-law, I found out over the phone that they planned to put me in a nursing home as soon as they got back. "After she pays for my trip, I'll dump her in a home," my daughter-in-law said, forgetting the phone was still on. What she didn't know, while they were enjoying Europe on my dime, I was putting together a plan that would change our lives forever. But before we continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. I've always heard that old age makes us invisible. At 72, I was starting to understand what that meant. Not because of the fragility of the body that would eventually come, but because of the way the people around me started to see me, or rather not see me. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed. The phone rang while I was watering the begonias on the porch. It was Valerie, my daughter-in-law, asking about some details of the trip to Europe that I had insisted on paying for her and my son David. "A second honeymoon," she said, something they desperately needed to rekindle their 15-year marriage. "Of course, dear," I replied, happy to help. After all, what else was the money Charles and I saved over 40 years of work for, if not to see our loved ones happy? The trip cost almost $8,000, but Valerie's tight hug and her radiant smile when I offered to pay were worth every penny. When the call seemed to be over, I left the cordless phone on the kitchen counter. That's when I realized Valerie hadn't hung up properly. Voices were still coming from the receiver. I should have ended the call immediately, but something kept me paralyzed. "I swear, Sarah, this old woman is so naive." Valerie's voice crackled through the speaker, talking to her sister. "She just handed me $8,000 without asking any questions. David thinks we should wait until after the trip to mention the nursing home, but honestly, I'm tired of pretending I care about her stories and complaints." My hands started to tremble uncontrollably. The phone almost slipped from my fingers as the blood seemed to freeze in my veins. "The best part is that she really thinks we're grateful," Valerie continued with a laugh that turned my stomach. "I mean, does she really think we want to spend our trip thinking about her? This trip is to get away from all that responsibility. As soon as we get back rested and tanned, we'll start looking at those facilities. I already found 3 good options that accept Medicaid." I collapsed into the kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Medicaid. I wasn't poor. I had savings, investments, a paid-off house. Why would Valerie be looking for facilities that accept Medicaid unless she planned on taking everything I had first? "The timing is perfect," Valerie continued. "She's been having those senior moments lately, forgetting where she put her keys, repeating stories. It will be easy to convince people she needs professional care." Those senior moments she mentioned weren't signs of dementia. They were signs of loneliness. I forgot my keys because I was distracted thinking about how quiet my house had become. I repeated stories because I was desperate for conversation, for someone to really listen to me, and I called them every day because they were my only family since Charles died 5 years ago. "I figure we'll give it a month after we get back," Valerie went on. "We'll make her feel useful one last time, helping us with some made-up emergency. Maybe tell her David needs surgery or something. Get her to sign over power of attorney for her own good. And then, boom, she'll be in a nice facility where trained professionals can take better care of her than we ever could." And the sarcastic way she said trained professionals made it clear she wasn't thinking about my well-being. She wanted me out of the way while maintaining access to my money. "The house alone is worth $300,000, Valerie calculated coldly, plus what she has in savings and investments. David thinks we're probably looking at $500,000 total. Not bad for putting up with an old woman's neediness for a few more weeks." $500,000. They were calculating my worth as if I were already dead. My chest tightened. For a moment I worried I was having a heart attack. The stress, the shock, the complete betrayal of trust was overwhelming. "I just have to keep playing the part of the loving daughter-in-law until after the trip," Valerie continued. "Smile when she shows me baby pictures of David for the 100th time. Pretend to care about her garden or her book club stories. Act grateful for her generous gift. God, if she only knew how much it annoys me to fake gratitude for money that should have been ours years ago anyway. Money that should have been theirs. I worked for 40 years. I saved every penny. I sacrificed vacations and luxuries so I could leave something for David. But apparently, they thought they were entitled to it now, while I was still alive, still capable of making my own decisions. The best part is, she'll probably thank us for putting her in a safe place." Valerie laughed again. "She's so desperate for approval she'll convince herself we're doing it out of love. We won't even have to feel guilty because she'll actually be grateful." That laugh, cruel and calculating, finally broke the spell that kept me listening. I hung up the phone with trembling hands and sat in my kitchen as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows Charles had installed when we bought this house 35 years ago. The silence felt different now. Before it was loneliness. Now it felt dangerous. I was alone in this house with no one to protect me from people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with an inconvenient old woman attached. I thought about all the times Valerie praised my cooking, asked for my recipes, brought her children over to visit their grandmother. It had all been an act. Every hug, every "I love you too, Mom, Louise." Every grateful smile was a calculated manipulation. My hands were still shaking when I grabbed my purse and took out my checkbook. There, in my own handwriting, was the check I had written just 2 days before. $8,000 to romantic European getaways. I was so proud to give them this gift, so happy to see Valerie's excitement. The irony was bitter. I had just paid for the trip they would take before stashing me away like unwanted furniture. As I stared at the checkbook, something inside me shifted. The shock began to fade, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Valerie and David thought they were so smart, planning my life without my knowledge, calculating my worth, deciding my future. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I might be 72, but I wasn't helpless. I wasn't confused. And I certainly wasn't going quietly to whatever facility they had picked out for me. I went to my bedroom and opened the old wooden jewelry box where Charles kept his important papers. At the bottom, behind my grandmother's pearls, was a business card. It was 5 years old, but still valid. Gabrielle Rivera, attorney at law, elder rights specialist. She had handled Charles's will and told me to call if I ever needed anything. It was time to make that call. Valerie wanted to play games with my money and my life. Fine, but she was about to learn that this particular game had rules she didn't know, and I was much better at it than she could ever imagine. Gabrielle agreed to see me the next morning, though I could hear the concern in her voice when I called. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Valerie's laugh echoing in my head. The cruel amusement in her voice when she talked about my senior moments and how grateful I'd be for professional care. I replayed conversations from the last few months, searching for signs I had missed. How many times had Valerie exchanged knowing glances with David when I repeated a story? How many times had they rolled their eyes behind my back when I asked for help with my computer, or wanted to show them pictures from my garden club? The worst part was remembering how hard I had tried to be the perfect mother-in-law. When David brought Valerie home 15 years ago, I was determined not to be one of those meddling mothers. I gave them space, respected their decisions, offered help without being pushy. I thought I had built a genuine relationship with Valerie. But lying in the dark, I started to remember things differently. Like the time Valerie praised my diamond earrings, the ones Charles gave me for our 30th anniversary. They're beautiful, Mom Louise. They would look perfect with my dress for the vow renewal ceremony we're planning. I took them off right then and gave them to her, touched that she wanted to wear something of mine for such an important occasion. But there was never a vow renewal. Valerie just kept the earrings. Or when she admired my grandmother's china set, the one I was saving to pass down. David is so lucky to come from a family with such beautiful heirlooms, she said. I grew up with nothing special like this. Within a week, I insisted she take the set for her dining room. You'll get more use out of it than I will, I told her, but they used paper plates for everything and kept the china locked in a cabinet like a trophy. The pattern was there if I had been willing to see it. Valerie would admire something, make a melancholy comment about not having nice things, and I would immediately offer it to her. She would protest just enough for me to insist and then accept with tears of gratitude. I felt so good about my generosity, so pleased that I could give nice things to my family. Now I understood. It had been a calculated manipulation from the start. Gabrielle's office hadn't changed much in 5 years. The same wine-colored leather chairs, the same wall of law books, the same feeling of quiet competence. But Gabrielle looked older, more gray hairs, and when she saw me, her professional smile turned into genuine concern. "Louise, you look like you haven't slept. What's happened?" I had prepared what I was going to say, but sitting there, the words just spilled out. I told her about the phone call, Valerie's plans, the nursing home research, and the calculations of my net worth. Gabrielle listened without interruption, taking notes. Her expression grew grimmer with each detail. "Louise, I have to ask," she said finally, "are you having any cognitive issues? Memory problems, confusion, anything that could support their claims?" The question stung, but I understood why she had to ask it. "No. I sometimes forget where I put my keys, but I'm 72, not 92. I remember everything clearly, even conversations from 20 years ago. My doctor gave me a full checkup last month and said I'm in excellent health for my age." Gabrielle nodded. "Good. We're going to document that. But what exactly do you want to do about this situation? Confronting them directly might just make them speed up their timeline." I had thought about this all night. I don't want to confront them, not yet. First, I want to protect myself, make sure they can't touch my money or force me into a facility against my new will. "A smart approach," Gabrielle said, grabbing a legal pad. "Let's start with your current setup. Who has power of attorney?" "Nobody. Charles and I never saw the need, and after he died, I just didn't think about it." "Who is the beneficiary on your accounts and insurance policies?" "David is the primary beneficiary on everything. I have about $200,000 in savings, another $150,000 in investments. The house is worth about $300,000, and there's a life insurance policy for another $100,000. Gabrielle jotted down the numbers. "So around $750,000 total. That's substantial enough to motivate bad behavior." She looked at me directly. "Louise, I have to ask you something difficult. Do you think David knows about Valerie's plan?" I had dreaded this question all night. David was my only son, my baby boy who used to run into my lap when he had nightmares, the boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a bug, who brought me dandelions like they were precious roses, but that boy had grown into a man who apparently thought his mother was a burden. "She said he was already on board," I whispered. "She said he was tired of my calls and visits." Gabrielle's expression softened. "I'm so sorry, Louise. That must be devastating." "It is, but I can't let it stop me from protecting myself." Gabrielle pulled several documents from her file cabinet. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll create a comprehensive power of attorney document that requires 2 independent physicians to certify any cognitive decline before it can be activated. Second, we'll set up a revocable trust and move your assets into it with very specific instructions about your care preferences. Third, we'll create an advance directive that explicitly states you do not want to be placed in a nursing home unless you are physically incapacitated and unable to care for yourself. How long will that take? If we move fast, we can have everything locked down in a week. But there's something else you need to consider. If they plan on having you declared incompetent, they might try to challenge these documents. We need to make sure you have recent medical and psychological evaluations on file to prove your mental competence." I felt a surge of anger thinking of Valerie's casual dismissal of my senior moments. "Can you recommend someone?" "Dr. Patricia Hayes. She specializes in geriatric assessments. She's testified in competency hearings, and her evaluations are considered the gold standard in court." As Gabrielle outlined the plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. For too long, I had just gone with the flow, letting Valerie and David make decisions about family dinners, vacation plans, even what gifts to buy the grandkids. I convinced myself I was being easygoing, but in reality, I was giving away my power piece by piece. "There's one more thing," Gabrielle said, gathering the documents. "You mentioned they're going on this trip to Europe that you paid for. When do they leave?" "Next Friday. They'll be gone for 2 weeks. Gabrielle smiled, and for the first time that morning, it wasn't a smile of sympathy. It was strategic. "Perfect. That gives us time to get everything implemented while they're gone. By the time they get back, you will be legally protected in every possible way." Walking out of Gabrielle's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The morning sun seemed brighter, and for the first time since Charles died, I felt like myself again. Not the lonely widow who was grateful for any attention, not the convenient grandmother who existed to provide financial support, but Louise Herrera, a woman who worked 40 years, raised a son, survived the death of her husband, and was not going to be thrown away like an old piece of furniture. The next few days passed in a blur of careful acting and secret preparations. I had to maintain my normal routine with Valerie and David while quietly building my fortress of legal protection. It was exhausting, but also strangely thrilling. Every smile I gave Valerie, every grateful response to her fake kindness, was now part of my own performance. On Wednesday afternoon, Valerie called to finalize some trip details. "Mom Louise, are you absolutely sure about covering the travel insurance too? It's another $300, but David thinks we should have it just in case." "Of course, dear," I said, making my voice sound as warm as possible. "I want you two to have a wonderful time with no worries." "You're an angel," Valerie gushed. "I don't know what we'd do without you." "Oh, and I was thinking, while we're gone, maybe you shouldn't be all alone in that big house. Would you like me to ask my sister Sarah to check in on you? She could even stay over a few nights if you get lonely." My blood ran cold. Sarah would be Valerie's spy. "Reporting on my activities, my visitors, my mail. That's very thoughtful, but I'll be fine. I have my book club, my garden club, plenty to keep me busy." "Well, if you change your mind, just call Sarah. I'll give her your number before we leave." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I was living in a spy movie. Valerie was already positioning people to watch me, probably hoping to gather evidence of confusion or decline. But I could play that game too. On Thursday morning, I had my appointment with Dr. Patricia Hayes. Her office was in a medical building downtown, and her waiting room was filled with elderly patients and their adult children. I watched the interactions carefully. Some children seemed genuinely caring, asking questions and taking notes. Others looked impatient, scrolling through their phones while their parents answered the receptionist's questions. Dr. Hayes was a small, precise woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She spent 2 hours with me running memory tests, cognitive assessments, and a thorough review of my medical history. She had me remember lists of words, solve math problems, draw shapes, and answer questions about current events. "Mrs. Herrera," she said when we were finished, "your cognitive function is excellent for someone of any age, let alone 72. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning is clear, and your judgment appears sound. I'm going to prepare a full report documenting your mental competence." "Doctor, can I ask you something? If someone wanted to have me declared incompetent, what would they need to prove?" Her expression turned serious. "They would need medical evidence of significant cognitive decline, documented instances of poor judgment that put you at risk, and testimony from people who interact with you regularly. Based on what I've seen today, anyone making such a claim would need to be relying on fabricated evidence." That afternoon, I returned to Gabrielle's office to sign the documents she had prepared. The power of attorney required 2 independent physicians to certify any cognitive decline. The trust protected my assets. The advance directive detailed my care preferences in clear, unambiguous language. "Louise Cassé," Gabrielle said as I signed the last page, "there's something else we should discuss. What if they try to emotionally manipulate you? Claim you're hurting David or being cruel to your grandchildren?" I had been thinking about this too. David had 2 children, Gabby, who was 16, and Dylan, 14. They were good kids, but I rarely saw them. Valerie always had excuses for why they were too busy with school and activities. "The grandchildren barely know me," I said sadly. "Valerie has made sure of that. She's been isolating me from them for years." "That's another pattern we see in these situations." Gabrielle nodded. "The manipulator isolates the victim from other family members so they become the primary relationship. It makes the victim more dependent and gives the manipulator more control." Friday morning arrived faster than I expected. Valerie and David were leaving for the airport at noon, and she had insisted on coming by for coffee before they left. "I want to say a proper goodbye," she'd said, "and maybe you could give me that recipe for your chocolate chip cookies. I'd love to try making them while we're at the hotel." She arrived at 10, looking excited and beautiful in her new travel outfit. She had clearly spent money getting ready for this trip. Her hair was freshly colored, her nails professionally done, and she was carrying a new handbag that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. "Mom, Louise, you look wonderful," she said, hugging me tightly. "Are you excited for us? I can't believe we're finally taking this trip." "I'm thrilled for you both," I replied, pouring coffee into my second-best china. I'd learned my lesson about using the good stuff around Valerie. "I brought you something," she said, pulling a small, wrapped box from her purse. "I saw this at the jewelry counter and thought of you." Inside was a simple pendant necklace, the kind you find at a department store for $30. I had just spent $8,000 on her vacation, and she brought me a trinket that cost less than I spent on groceries in a week. "It's beautiful, dear, thank you." "I thought you could wear it and think of us while we're away," she said, then leaned in conspiratorially. "David is just so excited. He's been working so hard lately, and this trip is exactly what he needs." I knew David had always been prone to anxiety, even as a child. But I also knew that most of his recent stress came from the pressure Valerie put on him to provide a lifestyle they couldn't afford on his income alone. "What are you most excited to see?" I asked, playing my part. "Oh, everything. San Francisco, Napa Valley, and Los Angeles. We're doing a wine tour in Napa, and David booked a cooking class in LA. And the hotel in San Francisco has a spa that looks absolutely divine." I listened to her chatter about their planned activities, mentally calculating the cost. $8,000 was just the start. They would probably spend another $5,000 on meals, shopping, and activities. Money they didn't have, which meant they'd come back in debt, which in turn meant they would need my help even more, which was exactly why they wanted to put me in a home so they could access my savings without having to ask permission or feign gratitude. "I should get going," Valerie said, finally checking her watch. "David gets nervous if we're not at the airport early, but Mom Louise, I want you to know how much this means to us. You are the most generous person I know." And she hugged me again, and I smelled her expensive perfume. I saw her perfect makeup. I felt the softness of her cashmere sweater. Everything about her was polished, beautiful, and completely fake. "Have a wonderful time," I said. "Don't worry about a thing here. Just enjoy yourselves." "We will. And when we get back, maybe we can plan something special for your birthday next month. I was thinking about that lovely restaurant downtown, the one with the jazz band." My birthday. Valerie had forgotten it the last 3 years in a row, only remembering when David reminded her days later. Now suddenly, she was planning celebrations, because she thought it might be my last birthday outside of a nursing home. After she left, I stood at the kitchen window watching her drive away in the car I had helped them buy. The house felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful. For the next 2 weeks, I wouldn't have to pretend. I wouldn't have to smile when Valerie made subtle digs about my age or my forgetfulness. I wouldn't have to listen to David's increasingly impatient sighs when I asked for help with technology. I was free to be myself, and more importantly, I was free to protect myself. Gabrielle had given me a list of tasks to complete while they were gone. First, visit my bank and remove Valerie's name from my list of emergency contacts. Second, change the locks on my house. Third, meet with my financial advisor to move my investments into the new trust. As I grabbed my purse and car keys, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked different somehow, more alert, more determined. The woman looking back at me wasn't some helpless widow waiting to be discarded. She was someone who had spent 40 years working, saving, and planning for the future. Valerie and David thought they knew what that future looked like. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The first thing I did after Valerie and David left for the airport was go to my bank. I had been a customer at First National for 30 years, and the manager, Robert Miller, had handled my account since Charles died. He knew me well enough to be genuinely concerned when I asked to speak with him privately. "Mrs. Herrera, is everything all right? You seem worried." I had prepared for this conversation, knowing I needed to be careful about what I revealed. "Robert, I need to make some changes to my accounts. I want to remove my daughter-in-law as an emergency contact and beneficiary." His eyebrows arched slightly. "Of course we can do that. May I ask why?" The last time we spoke, you mentioned how helpful Valerie was with your financial affairs. That was the problem. I had been too trusting, too eager to show off what a wonderful relationship I had with her. I've decided I want to simplify things, I said carefully. Keep my financial matters more private. Robert nodded, though I could tell he sensed there was more to the story. We spent an hour updating my accounts, removing Valerie's access, and setting up new security protocols. I also requested that any inquiries about my accounts be directed to me personally, with no information given out to family members. Mrs. Herrera, Robert said as we finished, I hope you don't mind me asking, but these changes seem quite sudden. If you have any concerns about financial abuse or manipulation, we have resources to help. The kindness in his voice almost made me break down. For months I had felt so alone, so unsure of my own perceptions. Having a professional validate that my concerns were legitimate was more comforting than I expected. Thank you, Robert. I'm just being cautious. My next stop was the locksmith. I'd never changed the locks in all the years I'd lived in this house, but Gabrielle had insisted it was necessary. If they have keys and unrestricted access to your home, she had explained, they can stage evidence of confusion or decline by moving things, hiding important documents, even bringing in witnesses to see you in a fabricated state of distress. The locksmith, a kind man named George, arrived that afternoon. As he worked, he chatted about home security, mentioning he'd seen an increase in elder abuse cases, where family members use their access to manipulate situations. The sad thing is, George said installing the new deadbolt, most of these seniors never see it coming. They trust their family completely right up until the end. While George worked on the locks, I walked through my house with new eyes. In the guest room where Valerie and David stayed when they visited, I found things I had overlooked. A folder hidden under the mattress contained printouts from nursing home websites, notes in Valerie's handwriting listing my assets and their estimated values. Even a business card for a lawyer specializing in emergency guardianship proceedings. My hands shook as I read Valerie's notes. She had been planning this for months, maybe longer. She had calculated not only my financial worth, but the monthly costs of the homes, the timeline for selling my house, even the tax implications of inheriting my estate. One note sent a chill down my spine. Louise's doctor up hit. Ask about memory issues. Get official documentation of decline. Valerie was planning to accompany me to my next doctor's appointment, armed with fabricated stories about my confusion and forgetfulness, hoping to get a doctor to document cognitive problems that didn't exist. I gathered all the papers and put them in a bag to take to Gabrielle. It was evidence of premeditation, proof that Valerie's plan wasn't a spontaneous idea, but a carefully orchestrated scheme. On Tuesday morning, I met with my financial advisor, Jeanette Morris. Like Robert at the bank, Jeanette had worked with Charles and me for years. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had built her practice catering to retirees and widows. Louise, Gabrielle Rivera called yesterday to discuss setting up your new trust. She mentioned you're making some significant changes to your estate plan. That's right. I want to move all my investments into the trust and change my beneficiary designations. Jeanette pulled up my files on her computer. Currently, you have David as the primary beneficiary on everything, your IRA, your investment accounts, even your life insurance. Are you sure you want to change all that? I'm sure. May I ask what prompted this decision? The last time we met, you were talking about ways to help David and Valerie with their financial goals. I had dreaded this question, but I had an answer prepared. I've realized I need to think more carefully about my legacy. I want to make sure my money goes to causes I care about, not just automatically to family. Jeanette nodded slowly. That's very wise, actually. So many people assume their children will use inherited money responsibly, but that's not always the case. We spent 2 hours restructuring everything. I kept David as a beneficiary, but reduced his inheritance to 25% of my estate. The rest would go to charities I had supported for years. The local animal shelter, the library's literacy program, the low-income senior fund that helped pay for medication and home care. Louise, Jeanette said as we finished, I have to tell you this is one of the most thoughtful estate plans I've seen. You're providing for your family while also supporting causes that clearly matter to you. If only she knew the real reason for my sudden philanthropy. But the truth was sitting in her office making decisions about my legacy. I felt proud of what I was doing. Valerie and David would still inherit a substantial amount, but they wouldn't get everything. And more importantly, they wouldn't get it automatically. The trust I'd set up required them to show genuine need and responsibility before receiving any funds. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah, Valerie's sister, knocked on my door around noon. I had been expecting it. Valerie had mentioned giving Sarah my number, but seeing her on my porch still made my heart race. "Louise, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. Valerie asked me to check in on you while they're gone." Sarah was younger than Valerie, maybe 35, with the same blonde hair and rehearsed smile. She was holding a casserole dish and wearing an expression of over-the-top concern. "That's kind, but I'm fine. Valerie was just so worried about you being lonely in this big house. May I come in for a minute?" I couldn't refuse without seeming rude, so I led her into the kitchen. Sarah set down the casserole and looked around with obvious curiosity. Her gaze lingered on the family photos, the medicine cabinet visible through the bathroom door, the stack of mail on the counter. "Valerie says you've been having some memory trouble lately," Sarah said casually. "Forgetting things, getting confused about appointments. That must be scary." "I don't know what Valerie told you, but my memory is fine." Sarah smiled sympathetically. "Of course it is. Sometimes family members just worry more than they need to. But you know it's good you have people looking out for you. Living alone at your age can be risky." Every word out of her mouth sounded like it came from a script Valerie had written. Sarah was here to assess my mental state, to look for evidence of confusion or decline that Valerie could use later. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, playing the role of the gracious hostess. "That would be lovely. You know, I was just telling Valerie how lucky David is to have such a caring mother. Not everyone would be so generous with that trip to Europe. $8,000. That's just incredibly thoughtful." She was fishing for information, trying to get me to talk about money. Maybe hoping I'd reveal confusion about my finances or make comments that could be used as evidence of poor judgment. "Family is important," I said simply. Sarah stayed for an hour, asking seemingly innocent questions about my daily routine, my health, my plans for the future. She praised my house repeatedly, mentioning how much upkeep such a large property must be. She even offered to help me organize my medicine cabinet, claiming she noticed it looked cluttered. After she left, I called Gabrielle immediately. "She was conducting surveillance," Gabrielle said without hesitation. "Everything you described, the questions about your memory, the comments about living alone being risky, the offer to organize your medication, those are classic information-gathering tactics. She was building a profile to support a competency challenge. What should I do if she comes back? Be polite, but offer no information. Don't let her into your house unsupervised, and definitely don't let her handle your medications or important documents. And Louise, document everything. Write down what she said when she visited what she seemed most interested in." That night, I sat in my living room with a notebook writing down every detail of Sarah's visit. As I wrote, I realized just how orchestrated it had been. The casserole was an excuse to get inside. The comments about my memory were fishing expeditions. The observations about my house being too big were setting up arguments to justify why I needed assisted care. Valerie and David thought they were so clever using Sarah as their spy, while they enjoyed their vacation on my dime. They probably thought I was sitting here lonely and vulnerable, unaware of their surveillance, unprepared for their eventual attack. But I wasn't the helpless target they imagined. Every move they made was being documented. Every manipulation was being recorded. Every piece of evidence was being carefully preserved by Gabrielle for the legal battle to come. They thought they were hunting a confused old woman. Instead, they had stumbled right into a trap set by someone who'd had 72 years to learn how the world really worked. Valerie and David returned from Europe on a Sunday night, 2 weeks after they'd left. I had spent those 14 days transforming my life in ways they couldn't imagine. But when Valerie called on Monday morning, I made sure to sound exactly like the lonely, grateful mother-in-law they expected to find. "Mom, Louise, we're back. We had the most wonderful time. San Francisco was absolutely magical, and the wine tour in Napa was like something out of a movie. We took so many pictures to show you. I'm so glad you had a wonderful trip, dear. I was anxious to hear all about it. We brought you some gifts, a beautiful scarf from San Francisco and some olive oil from a little town in Napa. Can we come by this afternoon? We're dying to tell you everything. They arrived at 3, both looking tanned, relaxed, and utterly self-satisfied. Valerie was practically glowing, wearing new clothes they had obviously bought on their travels. David looked happier than I'd seen him in years, carrying bags full of souvenirs and talking excitedly about the restaurants they visited. "Mom, this trip was exactly what we needed," David said, hugging me. "We feel like ourselves again. Thank you so much for making it possible." For a moment, seeing my son's genuine happiness, I almost wavered. He looked so much like the little boy I raised, excited and grateful and full of life. But then I remembered Valerie's voice on that phone call, the cruel laugh as she talked about dumping me in a home, and my resolve hardened. "I'm just glad you enjoyed it," I said, accepting the gifts they brought. The scarf was lovely, probably expensive, and the olive oil came in a beautiful hand-painted bottle. For a brief second, I wondered if I'd gotten it all wrong, if maybe Valerie really did care. Then she started talking. "You know, Mom, Louise, David, and I did a lot of thinking on this trip, about family, about the future, about what's best for everyone." Valerie sat on my sofa with the confident air of someone about to deliver good news. "We realize you must get lonely in this big house all by yourself." And there it was. "And we know how hard it must be to keep up with everything, the maintenance, the yard work, all the little things houses need. So, we've been looking into some options that might be perfect for you." David chimed in, his voice taking on that careful tone people use when trying to convince someone to do something they don't want to do. "Mom, there are some really nice senior living communities around here, places where you'd have your own space but also access to activities, social opportunities, even medical care if you need it." "We looked at a few websites while we were at the hotel," Valerie added. "The pictures looked beautiful, like cruise ships on land, with organized activities, group meals, even transportation for shopping and appointments." I sat quietly letting them build their case, watching the performance I had been expecting for 2 weeks. They were so confident, so sure that their European vacation had given them the moral authority to rearrange my life. "The best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore," Valerie continued. "No more struggling with home maintenance or wondering if you're safe living alone. Professional staff would be available 24/7. It's really the responsible thing to do," David added. "Dad would want to know you were being properly cared for." Bringing Charles into this was a low blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "These places sound expensive." Valerie and David exchanged a quick glance, the first crack in their performance. "Well, yes, they do cost money," Valerie admitted. "But Mom, you have this big house here, and you really don't need all this space anymore. The equity from the house could easily cover years of care at a very nice facility. Besides," David added, "you always said you wanted to make sure your money was used wisely. This would be an investment in your own well-being." I nodded thoughtfully, as if I were considering their proposal. "You've obviously put a lot of thought into this." "We have," Valerie said, relief evident in her voice. "We love you so much, and we just want what's best for you. We even made a few preliminary inquiries. Nothing binding, of course, just to get an idea of availability and costs." "How thoughtful. And when did you think this might happen?" "Well," David said, shifting uncomfortably, "sooner is probably better. These places often have waiting lists, and at your age it's best to make the transition while you're still healthy and can adapt easily." "At my age?" As if 72 was ancient, as if I already had one foot in the grave. "I see. And have you looked at specific facilities?" Valerie pulled out her phone with barely concealed excitement. "Actually, yes. There's one called Sunny Meadows that looks perfect. It's only 20 minutes from our house, so we could visit you all the time. They have a lovely garden, a library, even an on-site beauty salon." She showed me pictures on her phone, generic images of smiling seniors in a sterile institutional setting. The kind of place people went to wait to die. "It looks very nice," I said calmly. "What did you find out about the costs?" "About $4,000 a month for a basic apartment," David said. "More if you need extra services. But the house should easily cover several years. $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year. In 5 years, they would have burned through nearly $250,000 of my money, and I'd be trapped in an institution I never chose. That seems reasonable, I said. I saw their faces light up with triumph. So, you'll consider it? Valerie asked eagerly. Oh, I've done more than consider it. I've already made my decision. The shift in the room was immediate. They both leaned forward, anticipating my surrender. I've decided that anyone who plots to dump their own mother in a nursing home while she's paying for their European vacation is someone who doesn't deserve to inherit a single dollar from me. The silence that followed was deafening. Valerie's mouth fell open. David blinked rapidly as if he couldn't process what he'd just heard. Mom, what are you talking about? David asked weakly. I reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a folder. It contained printouts of the documents I'd found in their guest room, along with a transcript of the phone conversation I'd overheard. I'd had Gabrielle's office prepare everything neatly professionally, like evidence in a court case. I'm talking about this, I said, sliding the folder across the coffee table. Your wife's research on nursing homes, her calculations of my net worth, her timeline for having me declared incompetent. I'm talking about the phone conversation where she laughed about dumping me in a home after I paid for your trip. Valerie's face went white, then red, then white again. You were spying on my private conversations. You forgot to hang up the phone, I said calmly. And it wasn't private when you were discussing my life and my money. David grabbed the folder and started reading. His face grew paler with every page. Valerie, what is this? These notes about Mom's assets, about guardianship proceedings. You actually wrote all this down. I was just researching options, Valerie said desperately, making sure we were prepared in case your mom needed help. This isn't what it looks like. Oh, isn't it? I asked. Because it looks like you're planning to steal my life savings and stash me in an institution while pretending it's for my own good. That's not... We would never... Valerie stammered, her careful composure completely shattered. You said, and I quote, after she pays for my trip, I'll dump her in a home. You laughed about how naive I am. You called me the old woman and talked about how tired you were of pretending to care about my stories. David looked like he was going to be sick. Mom, if Valerie said those things, I had no idea. Actually, you did. I cut him off, pulling out another sheet of paper. According to these notes, you were already on board with the nursing home plan. You were tired of her calling every day and thought it was time she had professional supervision. The look of betrayal on David's face as he realized I knew about his involvement was almost painful to watch. Almost. Mom, I never said those exact words. Maybe not those exact words, but you agreed with the plan. You participated in it. You were willing to let your wife manipulate me into signing away my independence so you could live comfortably on my money. Valerie suddenly found her voice, and her tone shifted from defensive to aggressive. You know what, fine. Maybe I did say those things, but it's true, Louise. You're getting older. You forget things. You need more help than you used to. We were just trying to plan for the inevitable. The inevitable, I repeated. You mean the inevitable moment when you could legally steal my money? It's not stealing if it's family money, Valerie snapped, finally showing her true colors. David is your only son. That money should be ours anyway. We're just trying to make sure it's managed responsibly. Responsibly, I said. Like the way you've managed your own finances, constantly taking out loans, living beyond your means, relying on me to bail you out every time you make a bad decision. David was staring at Valerie like he'd never seen her before. Valerie, how can you say it's family money? It's my mom's money. She worked for it. She saved it. She gets to decide what to do with it. Oh, please, Valerie laughed bitterly. Don't act like you haven't been thinking the same thing. How many times have you complained about having to visit her, about having to listen to her repeat the same stories, about having to help her with things she should be able to handle herself? That's different from planning to institutionalize her against her will. Is it because you seemed pretty interested when I mentioned how much easier our lives would be if she was in a safe place with professional care? I watched this fight unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. My son and daughter-in-law were tearing each other apart, revealing the ugly truth behind their marriage, and I was the cause of it. But I was also the victim of it. "Enough," I said finally. They both turned to look at me, remembering I was still in the room. "I think you've both said more than enough." "Mom," David started, but I held up my hand. "I want you both to leave, now, and I want you to understand something very clearly. You will never receive another cent from me. You will never have access to my accounts, my house, or my decisions about my own life. If you try to have me declared incompetent, you will find that I have taken every legal step to protect myself. And if you try to contest my will, you'll find that most of my money is going to charity anyway." Valerie's face twisted in rage. "You can't do this to us. We have children to think about, a mortgage to pay. You can't just cut us off." "Watch me," I said, standing up and walking to the front door. "Your financial problems are not my responsibility. Your bad decisions are not my fault, and your greed is not my problem to solve." "Mom, please," David said, his voice breaking. "Can't we talk about this? Can't we work something out?" For a moment, hearing the pain in my son's voice, I almost wavered. But then I remembered Valerie's cruel laugh, the casual way she discussed getting rid of me, the years of manipulation and emotional abuse disguised as love. "The time for talking was before you decided to treat me like a bank account with an inconvenient old woman attached," I said, out. "I think it's time you both learned what life is like when you have to take care of yourselves." They left without another word, Valerie marching stiffly to her car while David looked back at me, his face a mask of loss and regret that might have even been genuine. But it was too late for regret. As I watched them drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and total peace. The confrontation I had been dreading was over, and I had survived. More than survived. I had won. 6 months had passed since that confrontation in my living room, and my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The house felt different now, not empty but peaceful. The silence that once seemed oppressive now felt like freedom. I could wake up when I wanted, eat what I felt like, watch my own shows without anyone sighing impatiently or checking their phones. The legal protections Gabrielle had put in place proved to be exactly what I needed. 2 weeks after I kicked Valerie and David out, they tried to challenge my competency through a lawyer they hired. But Dr. Hayes's comprehensive evaluation, combined with the documented evidence of their manipulation, made their case impossible to pursue. Their lawyer actually advised them to drop the matter entirely to avoid potential charges of attempted elder abuse. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were struggling financially without my support. David was forced to get a second job, and Valerie went back to work full-time for the first time in years. The trip to Europe, it turned out, had been charged to credit cards they couldn't pay off. Without my safety net, they were forced to face the reality of their overspending. A part of me felt sorry for them, especially for David. But a larger part of me recognized that learning to stand on their own 2 feet was the best thing that could ever happen to them. For too long, I had enabled their irresponsibility by always being there to fix their problems. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the window, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, standing on my porch with a teenage girl beside her. When I opened the door, the girl broke into a huge smile. "Grandma Louise." It was Gabby, my 16-year-old granddaughter. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her 8 months ago. Taller, her face more mature, but her eyes still had the warmth I remembered from when she was little. "Gabby." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling how much she'd grown. "What are you doing here?" "This is my friend's mom, Mrs. Lopez," Gabby said, motioning to the woman beside her. "She drove me. I really wanted to see you." Mrs. Lopez smiled warmly. "Gabby has been talking about you nonstop. She asked if I could bring her for a visit. I hope this is okay." "Of course it is. Please come in." As we settled in the living room, Gabby looked around with obvious curiosity. "The house looks different, Grandma. Brighter somehow." She was right. I had redecorated in the months since the confrontation, choosing colors that made me happy instead of the neutral tones Valerie had always preferred. I'd hung new artwork, rearranged the furniture to suit my needs, and turned Charles's old office into a craft room where I could pursue the hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. "I've made a few changes," I said. "How are you, dear? How's school?" "Good. Really good, actually. I made the varsity soccer team and I'm taking AP Art History, which I love." Gabby paused. Then she looked down at her hands. "Grandma, I need to tell you something. I know what happened with Mom and Dad." My heart clenched. "Gabby, you don't need to worry about adult problems." "No, I want to talk about it," she interrupted, looking at me with the determined expression that reminded me so much of Charles. "Mom told me and Dylan that you cut them off because you were being selfish and vindictive. But Dad told me what really happened. About Mom's plan to put you in a home. About the things she said about you." Mrs. Lopez shifted uncomfortably. "Gabby, maybe this isn't—" "It's all right," I said, then turned back to Gabby. "What did your father tell you?" "He told me about the phone call you overheard, about the research Mom did, about how they planned to use your money and then get rid of you. He cried when he told me, Grandma. I've never seen my dad cry before." My throat tightened. Despite everything, knowing David felt genuine remorse provided some comfort. "He said he went along with it because Mom convinced him it was for your own good, but that he realized afterward how wrong it was. He's been trying to find a way to apologize to you, but he doesn't think you'll ever forgive him." "And what do you think about all this?" I asked carefully. Gabby was quiet for a moment, choosing her words. "I think what Mom planned was horrible, and I think Dad should have stood up to her instead of going along with it. But I also think maybe you both made mistakes." "What kind of mistakes do you think I made?" I think you made it too easy for them to take advantage of you. Mom has always been kind of manipulative, even with me and Dylan. She has this way of making you feel guilty if you don't do what she wants. But you just kept giving her what she wanted, so she just kept asking for more." The wisdom in my 16-year-old granddaughter's words was staggering. She had identified the exact dynamic that had enabled Valerie's behavior for so many years. "You're very perceptive," I told her. "I get it from you." Gabby smiled. "Mom always said I was too much like my grandmother for my own good. I think she meant it as an insult, but I took it as a compliment." Mrs. Lopez spoke softly. "Gabby's been having a hard time at home since all this happened. Her parents they're fighting a lot, blaming each other. She asked if she could maybe spend some time with you if you're open to it." "I would love that," I said immediately. "But Gabby, what about your parents? Won't they object?" "Dad said I could make my own decisions about seeing you. Mom said a lot of things I'm not going to repeat. But I'm 16, Grandma. I'm old enough to choose who I want in my life." We spent the afternoon talking, really talking, in a way Gabby and I hadn't in years. She told me about school, her friends, her plans for college. I told her about the art classes I'd started taking, the book club I'd joined, the volunteer work I'd begun at the animal shelter. "You seem different, Grandma," Gabby observed. "Stronger, I guess. More like yourself." "I feel more like myself," I admitted. For a long time, I was so focused on being the perfect mother and grandmother that I forgot to just be Louise. "I like Louise," Gabby said firmly. "I like her a lot." As Mrs. Lopez got ready to take Gabby home, my granddaughter hugged me tightly. "Can I come back next weekend? Maybe I could even spend the night sometimes." "I would love that. But Gabby, I want you to understand something. I will always love your father, and I hope one day we can rebuild our relationship. But I will never go back to the way I was. I will never again let anyone treat me like a bank account or a burden." "I wouldn't want you to," Gabby said. "You deserve better." After they left, I sat in my garden as the sun went down, reflecting on the unexpected gift of my granddaughter's visit. Valerie had tried to isolate me from the kids, to control my relationship with them just like she controlled everything else. But Gabby was old enough to see through the manipulation, strong enough to make her own choices about who she wanted in her life. The phone rang, and I saw Gabrielle Rivera's name on the caller ID. "Louise, I have some news you might be interested in," she said. "I heard through professional channels that Valerie and David are getting a divorce." I wasn't entirely surprised. The stress of their financial problems, combined with the breach of trust between them, had probably made their marriage unsustainable. "How do you feel about that?" Gabrielle asked. "Sad for them," I answered honestly, "especially for the kids. But not guilty. Their problems are the consequences of their own choices." "That's a very healthy perspective. And Louise, there's one more thing. David's lawyer contacted me. He wants to know if you'd be willing to meet with David, privately. Apparently he wants to apologize and see if there's any chance of rebuilding their relationship." I considered it. 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately, desperate for any chance to reconcile with my son. But I had learned a lot about myself in those months, about the difference between love and enablement, between forgiveness and being a doormat. Tell his lawyer I'm willing to meet with David, but only under certain conditions. First, Valerie cannot be involved in any way. Second, any relationship we rebuild will be based on mutual respect, not financial dependency. And third, he needs to understand that trust once broken takes a long time to rebuild. "I'll pass that message along," Gabrielle said. "Louise, I have to tell you, you've become one of my favorite clients. The way you've handled this, the strength you've shown, it's inspiring." After I hung up, I walked through my house, turning on lamps as the darkness fell. Every room reflected my choices now, my preferences, my personality. The guest room that once held evidence of Valerie's betrayal was now a comfortable space where Gabby could stay whenever she wanted. Charles's office had become my craft room, filled with art supplies and half-finished projects that brought me joy. I thought about the woman I was 6 months ago. Lonely, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice my own well-being to maintain relationships that were ultimately one-sided. That woman had been so afraid of being alone that she allowed herself to be used and manipulated. But being alone, I had discovered, was not the same as being lonely. I had friends now, real friends from my art class and book club who valued my company for who I am, not what I can provide. I had activities that fulfilled me, hobbies that challenged me, volunteer work that gave me purpose. Most importantly, I had gotten myself back. The Louise who worked 40 years and built a life with Charles. The Louise who raised a son and survived widowhood. The Louise who was strong enough to fight back when it mattered most. My phone buzzed with a text from Gabby. "Thanks for today, Grandma. I love you. Can't wait for next weekend." I smiled, typing back, "I love you too, dear. I'll make your favorite cookies." As I got ready for bed that night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back had gray hair and wrinkles, but her eyes were bright with confidence and peace. She looked like someone who knew her own worth, someone who would never again let others define her value. Valerie had been wrong about so many things, but she was right about one. I had changed. I was stronger. I was more myself than I had been in years. And I was finally completely free. The cheap pendant Valerie had given me before her trip was still in my jewelry box, a reminder of how little she valued me. But now next to it was a beautiful silver locket Gabby had bought me with her own babysitting money, engraved with the words, "World's Best Grandma." Some people, I had learned, were worth the investment of love. Others were worth the investment of boundaries. The wisdom was in knowing the difference. As I turned out the lights and settled into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new adventures, new chances to live life on my own terms. At 72, I was just getting started. Now, if you like this story, click this next video appearing on the screen, because in it there's a story of betrayal and twists like you've never seen before.